So you could say that we're continuing to explore the nature of divine psychology. Someone asked me the other day, why is it that you don't explain the stories to us so that we can understand? And the reply that came to mind was that story of the Sufi teacher who was asked this same question, and he replied, what would you think if someone bought you a piece of fruit and then proceeded to eat it in front of you, leaving you only with the skin? And then another little Sufi anecdote is about that Sufi teacher who happened to be a farmer. And he'd written many books, and of course he gave dissertations and told stories. And there was someone who came to him and said to him, I've read all your books, and some of them I agree with, and some of them I don't agree with. And he went on with another litany of things. And the Sufi farmer teacher said to him, well, I have a farm, and there are people that come to my farm, and some of them like chickens, and some of them don't like cabbage, and some of them like sprouts, and others like carrots. And he said, they all have one thing in common, and that is, it's all food. And so we can look at this, and we can perhaps suggest, using the analogy of food, that all of our sensory experiences create perceptions. And these perceptions have to be ingested and digested, just like the food process in our physical being. So if we look at this, we can ask ourselves the question, is there just one organ in our body, like the stomach, that does all the work and sorts out all the food that we take in and sends it all to the right places? Takes some for nourishment and eliminates the rest? And if so, looking at this psychology and recognizing that we're talking about the psyche, could we say that our psyche that takes in the perceptions of the experiences that we have and sorts it out inside our being to allow the rest of it to come out, as we know it is with food? And there's a story, somewhat like a curved ball. It's about a man who wandered into a certain village, but it was winter time, so he was cold and weather-beaten. He hadn't eaten for 3 days, and he wasn't properly clad for the weather. So he was in rather a bad state, you might say. But as he walked into town, he saw a rather large house that had bright lights in it, so he decided to make his way there, hoping that he would be able to get hospitality there. But when he came up to this house that was obviously very opulent because it had velvet drapes at the windows, he knocked on the door, but there was no answer. He knocked on the door again, and he could see the velvet drapes being moved slightly, but after the drapes moved slightly, all of a sudden all the lights in the house went out. So he knew that there was no point in remaining here. And just as he was walking down the path away, a man came from the side of the house and said to him, "Don't bother to knock at this door. The man who owns this place is a total miser. He doesn't give anything to anyone. Don't bother." But if you go down the street and turn right and you come to the 6th house along the way, it's got a green door. This is the cobbler's house, and the cobbler is known never to turn anyone away. So the traveller followed the instructions that were given him, and when he came to the house with the green door, after counting the houses along the way, when he knocked on the door, the man answered. Obviously the cobbler, he had on his leather apron and the other accoutrements of a cobbler. And the cobbler immediately saw the state of this man and invited him in. And he was hustled over to the fire and given something warm to put on. The wife and the family came around him to tend to him. And then he was invited for food. There was soup to be had, and bread, and other vegetables that filled his empty belly to great satisfaction. But as he was thanking this cobbler and his family for the welcome and the hospitality that he was given, he looked around the house and he saw that the house was very sparse. There was just a wooden table with a wobbly leg. This room was obviously the cobbler's workshop with his work tools around. But there were no adornments, there was nothing fancy, there were no paintings, carpets, or anything else on the floor. But the children were ruddy, had rosy cheeks, and he'd been just fed a very, very nourishing meal. Well, this man was very grateful for this hospitality. And it was found that when he inquired around town, that indeed the cobbler gave largesse to everyone in need. And time passed, and it was learned that the man who owned the big palatial house had died. But he was buried, no one came to his funeral. He was buried at the far end of the cemetery without any fanfare or recognition at all. But sometime after this, the rabbi of the town decided that he would call on the cobbler. So he went to the cobbler's house and, expecting to be welcomed in, to be given one of those wonderful maybe scones or cakes that the cobbler's wife baked. But all that the cobbler said was, come in, would you like a cup of tea?" And the rabbi said, "Just a cup of tea?" And the cobbler said, "Yes, that is all that we have in the house. I am no longer able to give alms or help those in need, because it was not I, it was the one who was said to be a miser. He was the one who always gave me what was needed for someone in need. But now he is gone, and there is no longer the largesse that was able to be given." The rabbi, like the rest of the town, were very chastened by this news, and so the rabbi gathered the townspeople together to go to the graveside of this so-called miser and give him rights and things. And even when the rabbi himself was about to pass away, he insisted that he be buried in the same vicinity as the old miser. Muting suggesting that every character in every story is an aspect of our self. What does this story evoke for us? And looking at the comments that were made, the analogy between food and experiences that create perceptions. Where is it in us that this sorting out takes place? We know what happens when we ingest and digest food. Where is it that this story goes? To bring out what we would call understanding.
Well, wouldn't it be everything in us working together, like our five senses and all that, not just one thing? And with the miser, for me, I got, it's that thing of not going around and look what I do, look what I do, look who I am.
Yes.
So when you see